That quote right there came from a colleague, and it really got me thinking, what is the point of the grade? Is the point of the grade to be about what he knows about your topic, or is the point of the grade to punish him for not listening to you? And so that led me to doing a lot of standards-based grading, professional development. I went out to Portland a few times, and I became a teacher leader that then gave on professional developments in my district, as well as at my school for all my other colleagues. Then I realized I wanted to learn more. So I left teaching. I went down to the University of Georgia, go Dogs, and I was there for 4 years pursuing studies, left there with an ed specialist, came back to my district for the third time. So now in this time I came back as an instructional coach, and that's my current position. And that led me to writing this with some of the ideas we've been talking about, and that led me to this presentation that we have today. So I've been thinking about this a long time, and I'm hopeful that we can have some really good discussions. I just want to give a disclaimer before we get into it that this is not a cut and paste, how do you implement standards-based grading into your classroom presentation. If your goal is to walk out of here and know how to do that, unfortunately, you're going to leave disappointed. What I'm here to do is to try to get you to provoke your thinking and to then have you use your thinking to then explore ideas when you leave here. So I hope this discussion is very useful to you, but it's really about planting some seeds. I like to think of the movie Inception. I need you to get into your brain. I need it to start getting in there, and then you have to take ownership of it. And so if you don't leave here wanting to do these things, then it's kind of like a lost time. I mean, I can give you all the papers you want, but the same way we teach, we can say they're going to do it, but if we don't get in their minds and make them believe it, then we're not going to see any differences. So we have a few goals today beyond just getting in your brain. The first is that we want to analyze traditional grading practices. What do we do as secondary math educators in classrooms now? The second is build some awareness around the subjectivity of grading. A lot of us believe because we're mathematicians that we've got the science down. We measure what students know, we report that, we can calculate the averages, we can do weighted averages. You want me to take out the outliers? I'm good with that, all right? But we're going to talk about how that still can have a lot of subjectivity in it. The third is we're going to consider some alternate approaches to determining grades. So what are some thoughts we could have that maybe we don't agree with, but that maybe shed some light on other ways we could do grading in our schools? And then lastly, I hope that we leave here itching to discuss assessment and grading with our colleagues. So, all right, to do that, though, we're going to have to do a few things. And the main thing is we're going to have to do some role playing. So today, you are Mr. or Miss or Mrs. Pythagoras for the next hour and 13 minutes. All right, and you do know how to spell, it's okay. You teach in Virginia, which unfortunately is not Common Core. So if you're a Common Core state, I apologize that these standards are not going to align, but I'm coming from Virginia. It's Simple Radicals High School. It's this school year. So we're going to go back in time a little bit to the start of the school year. You're on the geometry team, whether it's your CLT, your PLC, whatever you want to call it. And those are the people at your table. And you're attempting to implement backwards design ideas as well as using the term learning targets to break down your math content. So taking state standards, and we're going to get into that in a second. You're being asked by your administration to use weighted categories, which I don't know how many of you, just a show of hands, of me too maybe, how many of you guys are using weighted categories in your gradebook this year? A good number of us still. So automatically, if you know anything about standards-based grading, we've already kind of broken the golden rule, which is that we're now averaging a lot of things together. But we have to work within the constraints of our environment. And since most of us, I assumed, would have weighting categories, we're going to talk about how do we implement these ideas using what we typically have, which is weighted categories. So I want to spend a minute just talking about these two because though many of you are probably familiar with it, I want to make sure we have a similar understanding of what backwards design, the definition I want us to be thinking about. So in backwards design, the way we're going to talk about it is you start with your state curriculum, your national curriculum if you're Common Core, and you take that and you analyze it. From that, you build yourself some learning targets. So your learning targets are typically student-friendly language that takes what the state wants the students to know how to do and then builds it into things that the students would understand what they need to do. So in other words, it's just converting it into language that's useful to the students, not just to you. You take your learning targets and you're going to build your final exam. What are you going to do to measure that your students actually mastered the content you need them to know by the end of the school year? You take your final exam, you break it down into smaller summative assessments. Okay, this objective, I want them to be able to do this. This one, I want them to be able to do this. This is how I'm going to measure what they've learned. From that, we're going to build our guides, which is kind of our GPS or pacing guides, however you want to kind of consider that. And then we get into the instructional loop. So we plan, we instruct, we get feedback in multiple ways, and then we kind of go in this cycle, and using the feedback we get from our students, we then understand where they are and when they're ready to take that summative assessment on the topic. It goes, let's say it doesn't go according to plan, the students don't do as well as you expected them to do, perhaps you remediate. You go back into that cycle, but then you go in this loop of you use your summative assessment to build your guide, to get to your instructional cycle, and you keep going in circles until you get to the end of the school year, the end of the curriculum, and that gets you to your final exam, your state assessment, whatever way you end up measuring the student's proficiency on the content at the end of the year. So that is backwards design in a nutshell. Are there any questions? What questions do you have already about what we're trying to accomplish today? None? All right, fantastic. Then let's jump into it. We're going to live through the first marking period. So I need you to come with me. The first marking period ends on November 1st, which is a Friday this year. And it's going to start on the first day of Teacher Work Week. So I need you guys to get in that mindset. You are now back into your planning week, the week before the students show up. You're super excited. Nobody's done anything to upset you. You haven't been asked to do too much. So you're here. All right, it's Monday, August 19th, not that long ago. We're going to create part of your syllabus. So inside your first folder, which you're going to be asked to open in a second, I asked you not to open any folders until it actually says open the folder. You're going to see this sheet right here. And I want you to just take on your own mindset currently. What would you put as the weights for each of these categories in your own syllabus? Okay? There's a few rules. Some obvious ones for us math teachers. An individual category must be between 0 and 100. All right? The weight of all of them together must be 100. And then lastly, I know some of you are going to say, but I teach with projects. And I know that's a thing, and I love that we're doing that. So I want you to think through where would you have that in your syllabus if you had to have it listed in these categories, just to help the game go along a little bit better. When you're done, I want you to take your syllabus, and I just want you to put it face down on your table. You're not going to look at it again for the next hour. So go ahead and open folder 1, and let's do this task. Yes, everybody gets folder 1. That's only folder 1. That's it. Yep, it's inside the first folder. Sorry.
This is what we want to do.
Yep. No, this is whatever you think is your prototypical class right now. Where's your current thinking? Hi there. Thanks for coming. Weird. No, it's okay. Lunch is a heck of a thing, and the lines are so long.
Lines are totally
Yep. Are you guys okay with how I'm speaking in the back?
Yes.
Yeah?
You can hear loud and clear.
Good.
Yeah.
Glad to hear it. Because they only gave me a wired microphone. I'm like, that doesn't seem very smart for a workshop. Close this door in a minute so it's not so annoying. I just want to give any stragglers a chance. Boom. Speak of the devil. Welcome, welcome. Oh, I'm sorry. My fault. I thought that was your name. I missed the name tag. Okay, great. So I'm seeing a lot of us already have our syllabi face down on our table. If you could just finish up in the next 15 seconds or so if you haven't. You'll notice there is a question at the bottom of your syllabus that I didn't explain, which is just your own thought. Again, there's no right or wrong answers today. If there's an absence in a student's grade book, are you going to count that absence as a 0% in the grade book or not? Just a yes or no. And if you have like special circumstances, that's okay. I just want you to circle yes or no for now. All right. So from here, we're going to fast forward through Teacher Work Week because, let's be real, Teacher Work Week goes by super quickly and you never feel like you're done with anything. So we're going to go through Tuesday through Thursday. We're not going to spend any time here. You've done a lot of things. You finished your syllabus. You studied the standards. You built great lessons. You organized your classroom. You made a really snazzy seating chart for fourth block because you're roving during fourth block. Pretty nice. And you made it because then your fourth block got moved. So let's get to the last day of Teacher Work Week. You have worked so adamantly, so hard, that today you don't know what to do with yourself. And so what are you going to do? You're going to actually take the summative assessments that you've built, and you're going to make your answer keys. You're going to start thinking through how you believe your students would answer the questions you're going to ask of them. So we're going to create an answer key for one of your summative assessments. This is going to be your third summative assessment of the year. It's called Learning Target 3. We're going to use the term learning targets, and it's on parallel lines and transversals. One of the major topics in Virginia on the SOL, which is our standard of learning test. That's what we call it. So here's the question you're going to make the answer key for. The figure shown is a parallelogram. Use the information provided to find the measure of angle BCD. The problem is going to be graded out of 6 points. The state standard, just to give us some context, says the student will use the relationships between angles formed by two parallel lines intersected by a transversal to solve problems. Instruction, you've already decided, will include an understanding that opposite sides of a parallelogram are parallel. Or you might already believe, because your students came from middle school, that they have that knowledge. And then you are going to grade student work on this problem, so I want you to take whatever notes you might want to help you when you see actual student work on this to help you grade those problems kind of quickly. So, with that said, do you have any questions on what you're about to do? Okay, go ahead and open folder 2 where you'll find your answer key. For right now, yes. Yep, this is just trying to get some baseline thinking on paper. So this was a good question, guys. This is individual. Just how would you grade student work? There's a chance that they were taught that, but the only way it's related to the standard is that the opposite sides are parallel. Yep. Mm-hmm. And the goal here is not to know if you know the math. X is 12, the angle is 72 degrees. If you want to check yourself to make sure you feel good about it. All these students are getting the wrong answer.
We're just saying how we would allot the point.
Yeah, so in other words, I'm going to show you student work, and I'm going to ask you to grade that student out of 6 points.
Just based on the exact wording of the question as it is.
Mm-hmm.
Here, okay.
Yep, and your understanding of the state standard.
Okay.
Yep. So how would you think about grading a student for that? Honestly, it was to give you the ability to, if you're somebody who thinks of math as an all or nothing, you can do it that way. But if you are somebody who likes to think through the steps, it was kind of like an allowance to give you, you could do 3 and 3 or 2, 2 and 2. It was just a number that was easily divisible by others.
Because I'm just thinking about the way that I
Yeah,
grade, because I'm on a proficiency scale, I'm on a 4-point scale, I'm just thinking about.
So you can think of it as 1.53, 4.56 if you'd like. So it's just trying to get you in your own mindset. Yep. Give you about 1 more minute to kind of get your notes. You'll have more time to actually grade student work so you can think deeply, more deeply. But 1 minute to get your notes. So I'm going to ask you to just finish up the thought you're writing down. Give you about 10 seconds to get that kind of last sentence on the paper, and then we're going to move forward. Okay, so fantastic. So we've now got our answer keys in place. We're going to fast forward some more. So now we're at the calm before the storm. You've survived work week. It's Sunday, August 23rd. You know the students are coming tomorrow. Take a second. Compose yourself. Know it's going to be a good school year. Come in with that positive attitude. And then we fast forward through a bunch of the marking period. So we're going to fast forward all the way until we actually took this assessment in the school year. So along the way, you met your students, you taught the learning targets, you dreamt about calculating slope, you established great classroom norms, you've done a lot of awesome things. All right, and now it comes down to it. So the students are taking their quiz on Learning Target 3, which is parallel lines and transversals today. It's Wednesday, October 23rd. I want you to grade the following students on the problem you just made the key for. All right, you are going to give the students a grade out of 6 possible points. I was asked why 6, and it was mostly because it allowed for a lot of different ideas, whether you grade on a proficiency scale or if you like to give partial credits in different ways. So that's why it's out of 6. And then I'd like you, when you're done, to enter their scores that you give them into this link, which is a Google form. You can access that link by typing in the bit link. You can use the QR code. If you do not have a device, whenever you have the grades, you can come up and you can actually just type them into this form. I have it already preloaded for you, so whatever way you need it. So once you're done with grading all of it, I want you guys to discuss as a CLT. So as a table, what kind of discrepancies or what kind of commonalities you had about the different students and how you interpreted their understanding of the problems. So if there's no questions at this point, I'd like you to open folder 3, which has the actual student work. Yes, sir. I'm sorry? Oh, yeah. Sure.
This question clearly has a lot more than just the thing that we're theoretically testing on that.
Right.
Are we grading it purely against that standard?
So that is the discussion that I want you all to be having right here.
Okay.
Yep, that's exactly what this is trying to do. Oh, really? It's not working from back. Try to make that huge. That was on accident. So hopefully you'll have your students graded within the next 2 minutes. The goal is really the discussion after the grading, so just kind of get your thoughts together. So once you just enter your grade into that Google form. Yep, so if you can take a picture of the QR code, or you can use this if you need to, if you don't want to access it on your own device. The bit link is case sensitive. I'm sorry, I should have said that. So this time I'm hoping you guys are entering your grades into the form and then starting to have a discussion with your table mates, your CLT, about the grades you gave and what knowledge you believe the student's exhibiting, which justifies the grade you gave.
I saw the only mistake of the sign. I probably should have gone back and checked.
Setting up, showing more. You know what I mean? That was the main mistake.
Yeah, so this last one is the most interesting one.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah, because it's are you creating the conceptual ability and understanding, or are you creating their communication and their reasoning process?
Right.
And so if you go communication, this is terrible. If you go for reasoning, it's the only one that actually does get the right answer, so they understand the math concepts.
Right. And what I think that something you just did that I have not seen a lot of teachers when I've given them this student's work is you didn't bring up the assumption that the student might have cheated. Like, you gave them the benefit of the doubt, which I think is a huge equity thing. Like, assuming the student did their own work, let's talk about what that means about their work. So
they
very
got
nice.
12. And 12, they could see that from somebody else's paper easily. But it's not just 72. If it's just a floating 72,
Right.
then I would think there wasn't any thinking going on.
Right.
But the fact is they do have the angle. They got 12 showing up. X is 12. X is the variable here. There's a pieces of it that show me
Sure.
that they did some of the thinking.
And did you look at his picture?
What do you mean?
There's a little bit written on it. Yeah. So it looks like, from looking at the students' work, these kind of like dot methods that they use to talk about parallel lines, which does give a little bit more about that he didn't just make a guess at what algebraic calculation to do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't normally think he's the most exciting. I really enjoy this student's work, Denise, because to me that brings up the question of what about the problem are we trying to give value to?
Yeah. Well, she had great thinking, but she didn't go far enough. So I think he's better, because there's more going on here. He just made a simple calculation mistake. She has a conceptual mistake. Conceptual mistake is understanding what the question's asking and reading it.
Yeah.
So these two are conceptual. To me, this is conceptually correct, and this is just a calculation. So
Yeah.
I would say it's more on.
Yeah, and to me, the thing that's interesting about Denise is that she actually labels the corner X.
So she knows what she's going for.
So to me, it screams the variable, like she thinks of an unknown as X, which that might have played into why she left the answer as 12 instead of plugging it in. Yeah, the pictures are really interesting. They add some nuances.
I did and then crossed it out, and I don't know why.
I gave her a 1. I gave her a 1.
But so I had 0 crossed it out to the 1. Like, does she deserve 0?
I mean, if I was actually grading this, I probably would have given her 0. But as I'm actually being asked to think about it, she recognizes the process.
Give you about 30 seconds. Okay. So, I don't want to bring out the elementary educator in me, but I'm going to bring us back together, if you guys don't mind. So if you can finish up the thought you're on, and I want to bring it to the group. So, I came around and I heard some really interesting discussions. What I think was most interesting was just kind of what do teachers tend to look at in a work. Some teachers are looking at the diagram, some teachers are looking at the final answer, some teachers are looking at the algebraic manipulations that are going on in between. So what I want to do is I kind of want to just have a little bit of a sharing session, and I'd like to go one student at a time, and just tell me some things you believe Jonathan knows or does not know about parallel lines and transversals based off the work you see on the paper. Yes, ma'am.
I believe that he recognizes that those opposite angles are congruent to each other based on the fact that he set up his initial equation correctly.
Cool. Is that sufficient? Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I knew that he found those angles to be congruent, but not because of the equation, but more because of his X's and O's on his diagram.
Is this okay to say it like that? He used the diagram to his advantage to get the congruent angles. Is that okay?
It's more so to show me that he
Okay.
didn't get the stuff that he equal.
Use the diagram
He knew he had congruent.
to show he knew the congruent angles?
Yeah.
How's that? Okay, great. Other things that we think Jonathan did or did not know? Yes, sir.
I think there was an issue with number sense because if he had taken his answer and plugged it into something other than BCD, he would have ended up with a negative angle.
Is that okay? Yeah. Anything else about Jonathan? Yes, ma'am.
He knew that once he got X, he had to substitute.
Ah. Anything else? Yes, sir. He had units, you said? Oh, nice. New units. Cool. How about Claire? When we look at Claire's work, I thought she had some very interesting thinking going on her paper. What did y'all notice about Claire?
Well, she knew that angle A and angle C had to be congruent as well.
What makes you think that?
Her original work and labeling her diagram.
Ah. Other thoughts on Claire?
Involved equation.
Ah. Yes, ma'am.
She also knew X was not the angle.
Mm. Other thoughts on Claire? Or inferences that you made on Claire based on her work? Yes, ma'am.
She's potentially confusing the relationship between the same side interior angles. So her equation states that the two are equal. So she's not understanding the relationship.
Potentially confusing the relationship
Yeah,
between?
between the same side interior.
Gotcha. Very cool. So, all right, let's move on. I mean, these are some really interesting thoughts. What I really want to be taking note of as I write these things down is the kind of verbiage and whatnot. So notice in this statement about Claire, we're talking about the relationship between the angles. In this one, we're talking about understanding the difference between the variable and the solution, the algebraic equation. So it's about what we're valuing as teachers in the work that we're seeing. And so let's just quickly go through Denise and Kevin a little bit faster because we're going to get into some more about them in a second. So any thoughts on Denise?
Also, how to correct the that?
Dang, come on now. Okay.
She recognized angles, adjacent angles, supplementary.
So yeah, Denise, if you guys notice, is the only one who actually used the consecutive interior angles instead of trying to set two things equal. Other thoughts on Denise?
She did think that X would be angle.
And I was having an interesting discussion. Yeah, please.
I feel like in her picture, it's the only one that looks to me like she's using the parallel lines and the transverse lines. Because she drew the arrows on the.
Oh, yeah. So Jonathan has it on the whole diagram, whereas she kind of isolated her part of the diagram. Oops, let's not break that. Did anyone by chance notice how Denise labeled that corner? Right? So to me, that screams potentially she doesn't know the difference between a variable and an unknown, and she thinks that anything that's unknown is X. And I don't know, I can't do it, I'd have to have a follow-up conversation with Denise, but I don't know with certainty if the reason she wrote this answer is because she doesn't understand that she had to plug it in, or is it because she thought that she did plug it in. So I'm not sure of that without talking to her. Other thoughts on Denise? And then how about my boy Kevin, who decided that he doesn't need to show you anything? What do you guys have thoughts about Kevin, though, based on what you see? Oh, I'm sorry. Do you mind? Yes, ma'am.
Kevin understands the standards.
Ah. What makes you say that?
He didn't show his work. He was able to use what was given to find the answers.
Cool. Yes, ma'am.
But I know Kevin. I look at his name on the paper, and I'm thinking that he might have been sitting too close to Joe. Yeah, I thought that too. So I would ask him about it. Right.
Yes, sir.
He didn't construct his argument, which is standard to not construct his theory.
When you say that, do you mean through what he showed on this paper?
Through what he showed on the paper, there's not an argument there.
Yes.
I'm saying this to someone else at my table, but he is now being compliant, but we are not reading compliant.
I'm going to leave it at not being compliant because it's about what we know about Jonathan, or excuse me, about Kevin. But yes, gentleman with the 3 tables back, best. Yeah.
One thing that our table said was that there is actually no evidence that he understands the standards.
Does anyone disagree with that?
No.
What is your counter argument to that?
I think he did a lot of work in his head.
You can see he did mark the corner.
So that was the one thing I have a hard time. I'd push back slightly here because of, just like Denise and Jonathan, he does have marks in these corners. He just didn't elaborate upon extending the lines the same way the other students did. So I can't say with certainty. You're right, it might be no evidence, but I kind of give him a little bit of the benefit of the doubt there.
Overall, I take issue with one part in this, and this is, I think, the teacher's fault. The reason why we're in this situation, because of the way the question is worded. There should be something there with explain how you know, or show your work, or something like that.
Justify.
Yeah, justify. Something along in there that will not get you in this situation as like Sam viewed.
Yeah.
Otherwise, why was he not compliant?
And I can tell you, because I have this whole assessment, at the top of the page is where they list those general directions. So it's about every problem they're expected to show full work. But it does not say show full work to get full credit. It just says you were expected to show full work. Okay, great. So I want to move forward, but what I want to show you guys really quickly, if this works, and I have not gotten to do this before with a group, so let's hope it works, is I want to show you guys the information you just put into, oh, this is where this is going to become bad news. How do I get out of the full screen? Oh, gosh. Because it's up here. Oh, no. All right, well.
So hover your cursor way up high and hover.
I thought it was right there.
There was a projector.
Yeah, thank you. There we go. Cool. So, sorry about that, guys. They came in and moved my projector right before I started, so I practiced on a different height, and I'm very short. All right, now let's see if our internet's going to work. So this is, all right, cool. So what I did was I used your Google form, and I took all of the responses. Come on. If you're going to do it now, this would be the time. I'd have backups. So I wanted to just show you what, as a group of educators who are all in here trying to show what we believe these students know, and this is the problem, right? Here's our responses, and we can see, I had an actual cool chart, so I'm a little bit upset here. I'll just kind of walk you through this because this is really small. But just to give you guys some perspective about that subjectivity. For Jonathan, we have grades anywhere from a 1 to a 5.5. For Claire, we have everywhere from a 0 to a 5. For Denise, we have everything from a 2 to a 2 to a 6. And for Kevin, we have literally everything from 0 to 6. So depending on what we as educators value in a student's work is clearly showing up with how we grade it. And I'm not here to preach really what's the right way to do it, but I am here to say that Kevin's failure or passing of a class should not depend on how we value his work. There needs to be clear expectations. There needs to be a conversation so that Kevin and Denise and Claire and Jonathan don't have to worry about because they got teacher A, they might pass the class, and because they got teacher B, they might fail the class. That's a conversation we need to be having as teams and helping ourselves develop understanding of what we expect our students to do and perform so that they can continuously show us what they know. Now, I'm going to use the knowledge that you guys just gave me if I can get this to work, because this is just not going to happen anymore. There we go. Sorry, everybody. I thought this would be a lot easier with a not mirror display, and I'm quickly realizing that not mirroring was the stupidest thing I could have done. So,
Command F1 gets you out of.
Thank you. Command F1. All right. So, assuming this shows up one more time, we're not going to do this to ourselves anymore. Okay. So, what I want to do for you guys is I do want to walk away with a few things to think about. And so I've compiled some things that as teams of teachers that I've worked with have had conversations about these exact same things, some things that they've talked about in their teams. So the first is analyzing the alignment between targets and assessment questions. So in other words, don't just assume that because the assessment item is about a topic that you like, that it means that it's aligned to the target you want your student to actually master. So having a conversation about how do your targets and your assessment questions actually align. I saw some really good conversations about what does this mean about this question. This question's on parallelograms. And I heard a lot of you all talking about opposite angles of parallelograms. But technically, for this standard, we probably want to be talking about the ones that are either the connection between the parallel lines on the same side or two sets of parallel lines and showing the connection between them. The other thing that I think to help reduce subjectivity is I heard you all doing it after, which is create informal rubrics and answer keys about what kind of feedback you want to give to students. What are the things that you're expecting them to do, and how will you respond when you see it? Use those to create feedback categories. So, I heard algebraic feedback. I heard notation feedback. I heard conceptual feedback. Those are different categories. And that helps you get in the mindset of how much do we value that category for this question. And you can then use that to standardize deductions on those kind of categories. So, okay, if they're making a simple algebraic mistake, everyone on the team, how do we feel about deducting 1 point there? Because it's not what we're assessing right now. And I'm not saying that's what you should do, but that's the conversation it should be about. And then obviously, the last piece of that is always discuss these things with your teams. Because it's one thing for you as an individual to believe in it, but if your class is very different than your peer's class, and that student transfers between those two teachers or moves to a different place, then we don't know what they're actually showing in the grade if we don't kind of have standardized ideas of what we're going to do with those students. So, from that activity, what I was hoping to do, what I hope we accomplished, so give yourself a mental check if this is true, is I was hoping we would build awareness around the subjectivity that goes into grading an assignment. And I was also hoping we'd consider some alternate ways to approach determining grades by talking with our peers at our CLT about how they valued the different things. So let's move on. We're going to fast forward through the remainder of the marking period because, that was a lot. All right, so we get all the way down to Friday, November 1st. We've done a lot of good things. We wrote 17 emails for students about missing things. We made 9 phone calls about those missing things. We had exactly 1 student stay after school, right? We know how that goes. So we get to that closing day of the marking period, and that's Friday, November 1st. And now we're going to look at Jonathan. So Jonathan, you already saw. So here is Jonathan's grade printout. I made it into an Excel document. But this is exactly how we would see it in a lot of our things. And the reason I made it into Excel is so that we could easily categorize it based on those syllabus categories we made. So that's Jonathan's grade printout. I have copies of that for you. And this is at the end of the first marking period. So this is everything from August 29th all the way to November 1st. With an elbow partner, I want you to discuss what you know about Jonathan based on the printout. And so you can go ahead and open folder 4, which has Jonathan printout. And just what do you know about Jonathan based on the report? Come on. Did I really just lose the presentation? Give you about 30 seconds to wrap up your thoughts on Jonathan.
If that is an obstacle, then what are we, then why do we?
Okay. I'd like to bring it back together. If we could bring it back together, guys, let's finish up our thought. Let's bring it back together. So I took advantage of the time that I just gave you all to make this a mirror display to stop having a panic attack up here. So I have just a Google Doc up, and I would just love to hear some people shout out. And again, I want this to focus around what you know about Jonathan, and it can be anything you know about Jonathan based on the printout you have. Yes, ma'am.
Because I have a student who's just like, he doesn't like doing his homework, but he obviously understands the material and he's acing his quizzes and tests.
Okay. Other thoughts? Yes, ma'am.
He's participating in class.
All right. Yes.
It looks like he went down on a quiz a little after an absence for an extended time.
Did not do well on the quiz after an extended absence. All right. Yes, ma'am.
He, however, seems to pick it up in time for the test on that learning target. Managed to get caught up with the quiz.
Is that good? Other thoughts about Jonathan? Yes, please.
Our assumptions about his homework, we don't know anything from this about why he doesn't have his homework or whether or not what he does outside. So I don't know what we actually know other than we don't have it in our grade book.
So in other words, kind of there was a value in saying he doesn't like doing it that perhaps is misguided there. Yes, ma'am.
It seems like he avoids any review work. He's getting half credit or no credit on anything documented as review.
I'm going to change this slightly. Other thoughts on Jonathan? Yes, ma'am.
He seems like he could be an auditory learner. He can get what's happening. He's probably following along what's happening in class. And who knows what's happening, somebody pointed out what's happening outside of the class, what's happening at home. So he's clearly getting understanding of the material.
I'm going to put that here. Seems to be understanding the material. Yes, sir.
Just to piggyback on what she said, you might be an auditory learner or you might have a strong previous prior knowledge.
I'm actually going to take that. Actually, let's keep it there. Any other thoughts about Jonathan? Okay, awesome. So I'm going to leave that for a second. Man, come on. And I'm going to go back to our actual presentation. Maybe. There we go. So the question that I have that is always kind of at the crux of these kind of conversations, which is, what about Jonathan should be determining his grade? And you guys already started having that conversation a little bit when I let you grade student work. I heard conversations about, well, the standard says this is what I need to be measuring. And I heard other conversations about, well, he needs to be able to do the algebraic manipulation because if he can't do that, then does he truly fully understand how this all goes together? And those are the kind of conversations we need to be having because at the end of the day, it's what about Jonathan should be determining his grade. And when we just did that kind of chart, I heard a lot of different information about Jonathan. So we communicate a lot in our grade book, either directly or indirectly. And we need to ask ourselves as educators, what do we want to be communicating? And so what I want to do is I want to bring in what the definition of a grade is when you work in a standards-based grading environment. I tried to synthesize a lot of different research and articles, and I came up with a very simple definition. And I'll just give it to you. It says, a grade represents a student's demonstrated understanding of mathematical concepts. So the idea that whatever a student can show me, whatever means it is that they are going to show that to me, how they show that proficiency, that's what my grade should represent. And so what I want to do here is you guys just walked through with Jonathan a lot of things you know about him based on the grade report. And now I want to see how the syllabus you created on the first day of teacher work week communicates what you just told me. So we're going to take your syllabus and we're going to use that to our advantage. Now, I've done this presentation, this activity a couple times, and sometimes it's messy for certain people, and I'm not trying to belittle anyone's intelligence, but I just want to walk through how this works. So I have this printout for you. So you'll notice it's a little different. It has some extra columns. So all you're going to do is you're going to take your syllabus, whatever weights you had in, this is just an arbitrary example, you're going to throw them over here. These are percents. You're going to make them into decimals. You can use whatever device you'd like, your calculator, your cell phone, whatever. You're just going to decide if you said yes to counting this as a zero, absences are zeros, you're going to use this first column, absences as zeros. You're going to take those numbers, multiply them by the weights. They're going to give you some points. Add those points together. You'll get Jonathan's grade. There it is. That's what I was looking for. You'll get Jonathan's grade. Similarly, if you said no, you will not count an absent assignment as a 0, you'll do the exact same thing, except you'll use this second column where you're going to excuse absences. So I just try to do some of the math. These are the averages if you include a 0 for each category. These are the averages if you don't include them as zeros for each category. You'll multiply those numbers together, get some points, add them up, you'll get a grade for Jonathan. So once you have, is there any questions on how to do the calculation? I assume we all have that pretty straight up. So what I want you to do is once you have your grade calculated, I want you to input it into a new Google form that I'll try to be better about. And then step 2 is I want you guys to talk as your CLT, as your table, about what are some ways we can make sure our grades that we communicate to parents, to principals, to students, align with what we believe is the standards-based grading definition, standards-based grading definition of a grade. Questions on this before you get started? Then you have folder 5. And again, the bit link is case sensitive. Of course.
We are doing standards-based grading in my school. We've been doing it for a while.
Okay.
Will you talk at all? You probably won't because we're almost out of time. Just about, like, my question is, there's a lot of subjectivity also when you're using the standards-based grading. Like, my colleagues and I disagree. Like, sometimes somebody would say that's a 2.
Mm-hmm.
I would say it's a 3, but mark them down on their learning skills. Do you agree with that? Or do you do any presentations on that?
So
more on how to look at grading students with the SPG.
So there's 2 aspects to that I would say. One is that standards-based grading is not a silver bullet in getting rid of subjectivity. It's about reducing it. Mm-hmm. And the second thing is, one of the last closing points I'm going to talk about is how we determine what we grade, what scales we use. And so I would argue that when we're grading student work, we want to be looking at it from a proficiency lens, which is, it's a lot easier for you and I as colleagues to decide if we think that student met the standard, is approaching the standard, or did not know the standard whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And if we can correlate that to our grades, then we'll have a lot better interreliability ratings between our peers.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you teach high school math.
Mm-hmm.
Do you use just standards-based grading, or do you do grades and standards?
So I have to follow, because of how my district works, almost this exact kind of formula, where I have to think through what categories do I want to weight what, and how am I going to. So pretty much I use the idea of every standard is its own grade, and all those grades are equal. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, it's very standards-based, but then because of how our grading system works, those all get averaged together. Right. So that kind of defeats the standards-based part of it. Right. But at the same time, a lot of people would argue, if you say the goal is they have to have proficiency in 9 of 12 standards by the end of the year, mm-hmm. that's really an average. You're saying proficient on 75% of them. So there's some really tough constraints with how we look at grades. And so I'm going to close this conversation with just like, here's some things that will really put you on your head if you want to really be thinking about why we do the things we do. Yep. Yes.
I am trying to switch to standards-based grading and figuring out how to think about it. And in a case like Jonathan, where clearly his knowledge of the standards is pretty high, but mm-hmm. his grade, when you average all those other things,
goes down.
Lower.
Right.
More of my kids fall on the opposite side.
Right.
Like they're coming from all different countries. They don't speak English. They're elementary and middle school. They're coming up to us having mm-hmm. failed math for 3 years, and I'm trying to teach them algebra standards. And so it's like the effort things are the ways that I can mm-hmm. not punish them for like the fact that they're really trying to meet these standards and just
So you're screaming to a bigger picture idea about like, why do we force students who are not ready for certain coursework to take the coursework?
Right.
the issue here is that once they're in the course, we're stating that by giving them a passing grade in algebra, that they know the algebraic standards. And so when we have reverse Jonathans, which we have a lot of them, what we do is we inflate grades artificially to make them not feel like failures. And what I would argue is that we need to, that's actually the last point of my presentation, which is we need to stop looking at grades as punishments and rewards. We have to kind of think of how do we motivate kids and how do we communicate objectively without making them feel like failures. Yep. Come on, dude. Come on. Okay, so I'd like to bring us back together, and I just want to start off by saying this is what the presentation was supposed to be like earlier, where the Google Forms auto-populated into my PowerPoint, so I apologize that we didn't get that before, but this is what we're supposed to be seeing. And so you'll see this is just a histogram of Jonathan's grade based on your syllabus calculations. It's clearly skewed left, but I think it's pretty important to talk about what's going on in this chart. If you take a look, as educators, our syllabi on the exact same numbers, we didn't change anything between it, goes anywhere from a 65 to somewhere between, well, I should rephrase, somewhere between 65 and 70, and all the way up to 90 to 95. And we can't blame that on, oh, well, we have different values of how we grade student work because we all had the same printout. So the question is, what can we be doing so that this bin gets tighter? And I was talking to one person during this, and we were having the conversation. What's really important to keep in mind is that I'm not preaching that by using different ideas, you're going to eliminate subjectivity. It's impossible. We're human beings. We have our own biases no matter what. We interpret everything we do. But we can do, as a team, as a district, as a school, a lot better than saying Jonathan is anywhere from a 65 to a 95. And that's by having really hard, really meaningful, really important conversations about how we determine grades and what we value as educators. And so there are certain things that standards-based grading would say we should value, and that's what we're going to talk about really quickly, which is, again, a grade represents a student's demonstrated understanding of mathematical concepts. So Jonathan is that, bless you, that prototypical student that we talk about all the time. Oh, he's mastered things, but he doesn't do a lot of the things that we want him to do. And when you start saying he doesn't do the things we want him to do, what you're talking about is behavior. And so what I'm going to show you is a few different calculations to help you kind of get your mindset around how what we decide as teachers impacts Jonathan. So we're going to use zeros for absent, and we're not going to factor in participation or classwork. I'm just going to take those out just to make life easy, because I think some teachers probably already do that. If you were to weight homework as 30% of the grade, Jonathan would get a 67 in your class. If you drop that 10%, he gets a 75. Drop it another 10%, he'll get an 82. If you don't count homework, Jonathan has a 90% in your class. So, and that's using 30-70 for quiz test. Obviously, if you were to alter these numbers a little bit, you would see slight differences, but they'd be pretty similar because his quiz and test grades weren't crazily different. So what we have to ask as educators and as teams is Jonathan a D+? Is Jonathan a C? Is Jonathan a B? Or is Jonathan an A? And I'm not here to say which one he is, but I am here to say that we should at least within our own teams agree what he is. And if we can't have those honest conversations about what we value, we're going to continue to see Jonathan pass and fail classes and grades have absolutely no meaning no matter what happens. And so what I want to do here is talk about a few things that help reduce behavior in grades. And this is kind of the conclusion of the presentation. I've got about 10 minutes. So what I want to do with these 10 minutes is I want to show you some things that we've talked about. And then I want to also give you some pretty outlandish ideas and just kind of give you things to think about so that when you go back to your teams, you can start pondering. So some things to reduce behavior. Grade late assignments the same way you grade an on-time assignment. Something's late doesn't mean that it's not quality. So saying that it's a 60% is not showing what they understand about the mathematical concept just because it's late. Another thing, eliminate completion grades. It's okay to track if a student's doing something or not doing something, but it's not really showing what they know if all you're doing is seeing if there's words on the paper. Eliminate participation grades. This is an equity issue. We like to think as teachers, and most of us became teachers because we like education, which means we were good in the educational environments we had, that if they don't participate the way that we think they should, they don't care, they don't do. Those are things that are us not stepping out of our own cultural norms. And so by having participation, we're already being very subjective of what we think participation is. And so I would say, think of other ways to talk to your students that doesn't mean putting in grades for how they participate. A student who's very scared about math would get a very bad participation grade when all they really want is somebody to talk to them about what they don't know. Eliminate extra credit, especially for non-math related things. Right? I mean, the number of syllabi I read that says, return this signed, you'll get a free 100 on the first week of school. Like, you know what I mean? We're already starting off on the wrong foot. We're communicating that grades are about behavior with our first grade. And so if we can eliminate that. And now, a lot of people have no issue with that. They're like, oh my gosh, you gives tissue grades. But I would even argue on your assessments, stop giving extra credit. You have a set of standards you're expecting your students to master. By giving extra credit, you're saying, here's another objective that really wasn't what you were supposed to know, but if you can figure it out, I'll give you extra points on the stuff you were supposed to know. And that doesn't communicate what they know on the standard you're trying to communicate. It does measure maybe extension and enrichment, and they're good at doing hard problems, but it's not technically going to measure what you're asking for on the assessment itself. Now, on the other side of that, some things to reduce subjectivity. So those were about behaviors, which I think are tied to subjectivity. Decide on categorical weights as a CLT or even as a department. And you will hit a lot of roadblocks trying to do this. We have implemented department-wide grading scales, and oh my gosh, I'm pretty sure we're going to have a coup by November. But it's an important conversation. The problem we're having is that we didn't help the teachers understand why we were doing the things we were doing. We just said do it. And so having those meaningful discussions about why this is important needs to happen before you decide to do that. The other is separate your grades on assessments by mathematical concept. So it's one thing to say a student gets a 75% on an end of quarter assessment. It's a different thing to say they got an 80, a 75, and a 70. That still averages to a 75. It still has the exact same percentage that you wanted to portray, but it tells the student, the parent, and the principal, and yourself, what the student knows and does not know on the content you're asking them to master. And I see some of you write these things down. I have the last handout has all this on it. So, yeah, sorry. So that was a couple of different things I was trying to do. Is I wanted you guys to think about your traditional grading practices, which was the syllabus. I wanted you guys to build some awareness around your subjectivity. Jonathan was anywhere from a 65 to a 95. I wanted you to consider some other ways to determine grades. So that was kind of those little strategies and also the conversations you all were having. And I hope that, I want to skip this because I don't have a lot of time. I was going to have you all come around and talk about what you think is your most important thing. So let's skip that. But what I really hope is that when you leave here in 7 minutes, you leave wanting to talk to your colleagues about this. Because we have, for some reason, for years and years and years, and Susan Brookhart just published an article about a century of grading and how nothing's changed, where we think good instruction, results. And we don't talk about this middle piece, which is the assessment, the grading, what we communicate, what those grades mean. We just assume that we know how to do it. And these are really important. These are the conversations and the decisions that determine if Jonathan goes to honors Algebra 2 instead of regular, if Jonathan passes a class, if Jonathan's going to have to go to summer school, if Jonathan's going to get into a college. Like, those are hugely important to Jonathan, and we just write it off like we already know what we're doing. And we should be willing to talk to others to figure out if maybe there's other ways we can do it. So to do this, I want to give you guys some pretty crazy ideas that I've thought about. And they're not that crazy. Some of you all might already be doing them. But some things to think about beyond what we've already talked about. So some ways to rethink our norms. First off, how about nothing below a 50% on an assignment? On our grading scale right now, on a 100% grading scale, we say an A is 10 points, a B is 10 points, a C is 10 points, a D is 10 points, but for some reason an F is 60 points. We don't have any justification for that other than the fact that 100 is pretty cool. And when you can find me a teacher who can tell you the difference between a 59 and a 60, I will say that teacher can use a 100-point scale. Right? Like the 50% minimum allows us to then think everything's on 10s. F is 10 points, D is 10 points, C is 10 points. I got a little off topic, I apologize, because it was my next point, which is let's move away from the 100-point scale. Right? We all talk about this 100-point scale like it's some idolized thing. But let me give you guys a very quick example. If I asked you to look back at your student work, and I said, hey, is Denise a 0, which means she knows nothing, a 1, which means she has a pretty big conceptual error, a 2, which means she got it but she had a mistake, a 3 means she's proficient, I think 90 to 100% of us would all be able to decide if she's a 0, 1, 2, or 3. But if I asked you, is she a 74 or a 75, there'd be no rhyme or reason for that discussion. So moving away from that 100-point scale, which then also starts making that minimum 50 make a lot more sense, because a 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 are all spaced equally, whereas 0 to 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 are not. Now, one thing I will just foreshadow, I do not agree with the idea, and this is my own personal thoughts here, 0 is 0, 1 is 25, 2 is 50, 3 is 75, 4 is 100. There needs to be some really thoughtful discussions about if you have to work in a 100-point scale, which most of us do, how does a 3 translate to 100? Like where on the 100-point scale? Because it is not just arbitrarily 75. So that's a very important discussion to have with your peers.
Is number 1 assuming they do the assignment?
That's a great question. So guys, the biggest thing I hear on the first point, which is a minimum 50. How do I give the student who didn't do anything the same thing as the student who tried but didn't get it? And the conversation I would have, it comes right back to here. If the student did it but didn't know anything, and the student didn't do it, on a 4-point scale, a 0 doesn't seem that crazy to give them the same grade. So I would argue, yes, that a 50% for not doing it, we want to think about it just on a fail to pass scale. Yes, sir?
Or don't give them grades on things that they're doing that does not assess their understanding of material.
There you go. So yeah, if we can get out of homework grades, counting in the grade book, or things of that nature, then we kind of already passed this. Now then the question becomes, oh, well, Devin got a 25. You're telling me I have to give them a 50? And again, I would go back to this. If we moved away from thinking about it on 100 points, it wouldn't be that crazy to say Devin deserves a 0 out of 4. All right, and here's a really good analogy. If you get a 0 on a single assignment, it takes 9 100% to get an A. If you get a 0 on a single assignment, it takes 6 70% to get back to passing. So we are completely crushing students with zeros because of our dependency on the 100-point scale. And we're just saying, you missed something, you don't deserve it. You're already screwed at that point. The third thing is giving retakes. A lot of people don't like this idea, but I would say it screams exactly how society works. You don't get that in real life. Yes, you do. If you didn't pass your driver's test the first time around, you just could never drive again? No, that's not how it works in real life. Oh, you didn't get a good grade on the SAT? Guess what? You can take the SAT again. Giving retake opportunities helps us say the grade represents what the student knows, not what the grade represents what the student knew by a certain date. So giving those retake opportunities. And then lastly is replacing early assessments with future ones if they improve. Because, again, it's back to that idea. Do you care if Devin knew the answer on August 31st, or do you care that Devin now knows the answer on November 1st? And the more we can closely align that it's Devin learned it eventually, that screams exactly what we want in standards-based, which is that it shows what they knew by the end. Last but not least, this is not on your handout, so this one's do not use grades as punishments or rewards. We value grades, and we think that it's motivation. We equate grade to motivation. And that screws us in the long run. It makes students only want to do things if it's graded. You all go into class, and the kid goes, is this graded? Is this graded? Is this graded? Go to a kindergarten classroom. There is not a single student who comes in and says, is me counting to 10 graded? We teach them to care about that. So we can also unteach them. Right? So we don't use grades as punishments or rewards. We don't do that. If anything, this would be my number one, because that's what everything else hinges on. When we stop thinking about grades as punishment and reward, and we think about it as communicating what a student understands, our grade books start becoming a lot more true, altruistic to what we want grades to mean. And so lastly, I'll leave you with that open folder 6.
Can I add one more thing to your assessment?
Sure.
Stay away from gotcha questions too. Let's see if this question separates
right.
the top kids from that doesn't cover
the distractor.
Understand, show understanding.
Right. Yeah. So in folder, agreed entirely. So the idea that you're not trying to trick students with what you assess them on. And so in folder 6 is a yellow sheet. On one side of your yellow sheet is the bullet points that I promised you, along with, except for the last one, which is do not use grades as punishment. On the back side of your sheet is a very short resource list of if, hey, standards-based grading is something I'm trying to understand, or Dean, you had some pretty good thoughts, but I don't know if I agree. Those are some articles you might want to read or think about. The first one by Jan Chapuis that's on there about classroom assessment for learning is a very powerful book about how we transform towards a more mindful approach to grading. At the very top is Matt McTownsley. He did his dissertation on standards-based grading, and pretty much part of his dissertation is he created a resource bank of literally any article that's been published about standards-based grading. He also has pages on like, oh, but if you don't, like typical teacher responses. Oh, you don't grade it, so they're not going to do it. And talking about why that needs to change, the mentality that we have about grades and those kind of things. So I would highly recommend checking out his site. With the last minute, if there's anything that you guys have questions about or thoughts you'd like to explore, we could do that if this loads. If not, then you can't ask questions because it's going to ask you if you want questions. I'm sorry?
How many retakes?
That's a great question. So my first year of doing retakes, I did unlimited retakes because I was a go-getter believer in the idea. And I quickly learned that I was going to get burned out creating 15 retakes for every assessment. So I went through an actual practitioner mindset of, it doesn't make a lot of sense to let just a student retake to retake. So a student had to work with me, demonstrate proficiency, that they have learned something, and then I would allow them to take a single retake. But then I also structured it so that the test on the same material could replace the grade. So they really had 2 retake opportunities. That was kind of my mindset. Some schools do 3 retakes. Some schools do 1 retake. Some schools just do, hey, come talk to me after school and show me you've learned it. It's really about what you believe communicates what the student knows. Yeah, of course. Other questions or thoughts to close out while this tries to load? Great. So there it is. So I'll close off with just if there's anything you'd like to discuss or questions you'd like to have that you didn't have time to do today. My information's on pretty much every handout I gave you, but it's also on this last slide that's not going to load. If it's trying, I see it. If you want my information, if you didn't get it at the start, feel free to come up and talk to me. I'd love to talk to you all about this more. Thank you so much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your conference. Thank you, guys. It's coming. I see it.